So today's session it's basically our intro to Blackboard or our Blackboard basics session. This is primarily for those who may be brand new to using Blackboard. Okay, I see a few familiar faces, and even if you are not new to Blackboard, it's always good to have a refresher, right? So we'll go over a few best practices for organizing content. Later in the session, I will walk you through or share my screen and walk you through some of the basic Blackboard tools that we'll be using. And then throughout the presentation, I'll give tips or we'll give tips and strategies for effective online instruction. This morning's session was planning and preparing for online course delivery. So this is kind of the part two to that. This morning we talked about different strategies and what to think about as you transition your face-to-face course to an online teaching modality. So today you may hear some repeat of some of those concepts if you attended this morning's session. If you did not attend this morning, the recording will be available, so you can go back and review that presentation. So in order to get ready for students, what are some of the things that you should prepare for, right? You definitely want to provide your instructor contact information. How do you want your students to contact you? Of course, you want them to have your email, your name. They should already have that, but sometimes they may need a reminder or how to address you. The primary mode of communication. Do you prefer that your students email you using the course messages in Blackboard or the GSU course or GSU email? So we'll talk about the difference between those two today. Excuse me. If you have you may need to upload a revised syllabus. It's best that you include that as a PDF because it's a little more difficult to alter. So making sure you have a link to your syllabus. What guidelines or course policies will you have for your students? For example, do you want your students to log in every day? Will you tell your students to expect an announcement from you daily? Will they receive an announcement from you every other day? Your due dates, all of those general course policies that will help them follow along in your course are going to be ideal if you establish them and make sure they are readily visible to your students. Having a course questions forum. That is a discussion forum that is created for basic questions. It's a standing forum. It's typically not graded. We like to call them course questions. I've seen some creative names for them, but if you advise your students to come to the course questions form first, it's kind of a running FAQ form, if you will. If you advise your students, if you have a general course question about course content, assignments, the flow of the course, any general questions for the instructor, advising your students to check the course questions form first will allow them to see if the question has already been asked and you've already provided an answer to it. B, if other students are reading and they know the answer to that question, they can respond on your behalf if it's something very general. And then 3, if you answer the question once in the course questions form, it helps to prevent you from being inundated with emails of the same exact question. But ideally, if your communication with your students is clear, whether it's your course announcement, your syllabus, if you have live lectures and office hours with your students, if everything is set up effectively, it will automatically reduce some of the questions, but of course you'll always have more. And lastly, making sure that the dates for all assignments, your due dates, the availability dates are set and ready to go for your students so that they are available at the start of the week or at the start of the learning unit so that students can stay on task. So your prepared course basically means that students will not log into Blackboard and find an empty course. they will reach out to our team and say, hey, I have this course, and there's nothing there. Or at worst, they may contact a dean or a chair and say, hey, there's nothing in the course. So you always want to make sure that maximize the student's learning experience, that you do have prepared content for them. That will vary. What the content looks like may vary depending on your course content. It may depend on your grade level, whether they're undergraduate or graduate students. But each unit should ideally include learning objectives for that unit, or the learning goals. What will your students expect, or what should they expect to accomplish when they log into one of your learning units? Any readings that they have. Now, here's a common misconception or a common practice that I have seen, and this is not to pick on anyone per se, but sometimes faculty may assume that because they list the course chapter readings in the syllabus, that the syllabus is a an end-all be-all document for online instruction. This is a common misconception. Even if you outline in your syllabus that during week 1 they're going to read chapter 2, or during week 5 and 6 they're going to read chapters 10 and 11, you still need to include or outline the unit readings inside of your Blackboard course. Quite naturally, yes, the syllabus is your instruction manual, if you will, but even with the instruction manual, for example, to a car, you still need to be able to see your radio and your gear shift and your controllers for your car in order to drive it on your dashboard, right? It's the similar concept. Might be a bad analogy, but that's the best I can come up with at this time. Even though you have that syllabus or the instruction manual, you still need to include the necessary components within your online course. So outlining the readings for your students, outline what those learning activities entail for each unit of instruction is going to be key so that students are able to follow along in your course. As you prepare to manage your course going forward, it can be a bit challenging. If you're transitioning from face-to-face to online, you're used to seeing your students face-to-face, answering their questions, at the end of class or before class. This is why it's critical to have effective course design, because it can be a bit overwhelming if your course is not set up properly. So you also want to make sure that you yourself as the instructor are frequently logging into your course, right? Logging in on a daily basis, checking your emails for any student concerns. That helps you monitor your student engagement, right? If students are you can see your students face to face. So if they're in your class, in a traditional classroom, you can see who's zoning off, or you can see who is texting or even dozing off, unfortunately. But in the online environment, you have to rely on different cues, and you have to rely on different strategies to gauge your student engagement. If you are not logging in, you can't tell if your students are engaged because you are not engaged, okay? So you want to make sure that you are logging in frequently, monitoring your discussion board and any learning activities. But first and foremost, you have to have those activities in your course to begin with. We just had this conversation in a virtual meeting maybe an hour or so ago. If students who are new to online are how do you know if they've logged in? How do you know if they're engaged? Well, if the only thing you have in your online course is for them to read this chapter and upload this paper by Sunday on midnight, they have no incentive or no reason to stay engaged with the course Tuesday through Saturday. They're going to log off of Blackboard. They're going to read, hopefully, the chapter, and they're not going to log back into the course until Sunday when it's time to upload their paper. That's not necessarily effective instruction, right? You don't want to see your students in a face-to-face class only to show up and say, here you go, here's my paper, bye. That doesn't work. So making sure you have engaging interaction in your course is going to be key, but also managing your course via virtual office hours, providing prompt grading and student feedback when you return your assignments. Now, if you have weekly discussion boards and you have multiple discussions per week, you may not want to give lengthy paragraph response to a brief discussion board. But if you are, especially if you're meeting with your students live via Collaborate, you'll be giving them feedback to the whole group, which is fine. But you definitely want to give individualized feedback for any any major assessments for their papers and exams and things like that. So here are just some overall strategies for managing your course. You always want to, when you can, deliver one-to-many communication or interactions. For example, right now our live Collaborate session is a one-to-many strategy. I'm primarily delivering content to all of you in the session. But you'll also have the one-on-one interaction strategies via virtual office hours. Your private or individual student feedback is one-on-one. Your students can even have one-on-one interactions with one another or one-to-many with one another. So making sure you have various interaction is going to be key to effective course strategies and effective course management. What does your course conceptually look like if you are providing weekly or solid weekly content? Another disclaimer, and I talked about this morning, we don't expect you to be able to develop a fully online course in less than a week's notice. I'm sure everyone received the president's memo that we will be fully online for the remainder of the spring term. So this is real, and we will have to rely on our learning management system. So no, you probably, or you may not have fully developed content. It's okay to build as you go at this point, right? But having a weekly lesson or a weekly folder with a brief description for what the unit will contain is going to be key to your students. So if you were, and we'll walk through this step by step, we do have tutorials on how to create these modules, but what you see indicated on the screen, weeks 1 through 4, are learning modules. These are blank learning modules without the description. If you already have existing modules or folders such as these and you want to add a description, this little drop down arrow is a hidden icon that you'll see in a lot of, or throughout Blackboard. If you hover your mouse around Blackboard, you'll see these pop up. I always recommend faculty who are new to Blackboard, play around with it. Click around in your show and see what each tool dives or takes you to. Now, be cautious about hitting a delete button because that's different. Don't click on delete. I want you to play around and click on the drop down and click on the different links, but you do want to pause and think twice before deleting any content, especially your student work, discussion posts, and any content that's already been uploaded. So if you want to add a description to a learning module or to a folder, you can click almost anything in your course is editable, right? So once you click on that drop down to edit, you can go back and add more detail or more description. Some of you who are already teaching face-to-face and have only used Blackboard just to post a PowerPoint here or there or post your syllabus, now's the time to really expand how you're using your content. So just keep these tips and these tools in mind for making sure that if your student is logging in, they'll be aware. In this module, you'll learn about the history of healthcare safety as well as current safety issues. I promise this slide is a few years old, but how relevant is it to our situation today? So just making sure that you provide clear instruction for each unit of it, And after you have edited your modules or created your newly created modules or content folders, this is what your students can expect to see. I'm sure all of us will agree that if you are logging into a course and you see something like this, you'll see Module 1 is the course introduction with the brief description. It makes it very intuitive and easier for students to follow along and engage with your content.